Adi, you see the automatic doors of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport slid open at exactly 7:45 in the morning, the same time they had opened every single day for the past 10 years. John Mercer stepped through them with the careful, measured gait of a man who had walked this path so many times that his feet knew every crack in the tile, every slight incline in the floor. In his weathered hands, he carried a bouquet of carnations. They had been white once, perhaps 2 or 3 days ago, but now they were the color of old newspaper, their edges brown and curling inward like arthritic fingers. The cellophane wrapper crinkled softly with each step, a sound that had become as familiar to John as his own breathing. He was 78 years old, though he looked older. His face was a landscape of deep lines, each one a river carved by years of sun and sorrow. His hair, what remained of it, formed a silver horseshoe around his spotted scalp. He wore the same outfit he always wore, pressed khaki trousers that had been washed so many times the fabric had gone soft and thin, a blue button-down shirt with frayed cuffs, and a navy windbreaker that had seen better decades. On his feet were white sneakers with Velcro straps instead of laces, the kind elderly people wore when their fingers could no longer manage the intricate dance of tying bows. The morning rush was already building. Business travelers in dark suits wheeled carry-on luggage with practiced efficiency, their faces buried in smartphones. Families clustered together like nervous birds, parents doing mental inventory of children and bags and boarding passes. The airport hummed with that peculiar energy of transience, thousands of people passing through but never staying, always moving towards somewhere else. John moved against this current like a stone in a river, unmoved and unmoving. He made his way to Terminal C, Gate 23, the same gate he had visited every single day for 3,650 days. He knew the number because he had counted them, marked them on a calendar that hung in his kitchen with small, precise X's. The TSA agents knew him by name now. Marcus, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, nodded as John approached the security checkpoint. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," Marcus said, his voice carrying that careful gentleness people reserved for the elderly and the fragile. "Beautiful day outside." "Is it?" John replied, though he did not sound particularly interested in the answer. His eyes were already scanning the departures board, searching for something that was never there. Marcus exchanged a glance with his colleague, Teresa, a woman in her 50s who had worked airport security for 23 years and thought she had seen everything until she met John Mercer. Teresa's expression was a mixture of pity and confusion, the same look most people wore when they encountered John's daily ritual. "You know you can't go through without a boarding pass, Mr. Mercer," Marcus said, though they had this same conversation every morning. "But you can wait in the public area, just like always." "I know," John said. "I'll wait here." He turned and walked to his spot, a particular bench near the security checkpoint with a clear view of Gate 23. The bench had a small depression worn into its metal surface, shaped precisely to John's form from years of sitting. He lowered himself down with a soft grunt, placed the wilted flowers beside him, and began his vigil. The morning stretched on. People came and went in waves following the rhythm of departures and arrivals. A young couple argued about a missed connection. A businessman spilled coffee on his laptop and swore creatively. A little girl in a pink dress lost her stuffed elephant and wailed until a janitor found it wedged behind a trash can. Life happened all around John Mercer, but he sat still as a statue, his eyes fixed on Gate 23. Around 10:30, a group of teenagers on a school trip noticed him. They huddled together, whispering and pointing. One of them, a tall boy with acne and too much confidence, approached. "Hey, old man," the boy said, his friends giggling behind him. "Who you waiting for? Your girlfriend finally coming back after she ran away?" John did not look at him. His eyes remained fixed on the gate. "Leave him alone, Tyler," one of the girls said, tugging at the boy's sleeve. "That's mean." "I'm just asking a question," Tyler protested, but something in John's stillness unsettled him. He backed away, and the group moved on, their laughter fading into the ambient noise of the terminal. By noon, John's flowers had wilted further. their stems drooping like the necks of exhausted swan. He did not seem to notice. A janitor, an older Hispanic man named Roberto, who had been cleaning this terminal for 16 years, paused nearby with his cart. "Mr. Mercer," Roberto said softly, "you want I should throw those away for you? Get you some fresh ones from the shop?" "No, thank you, Roberto," John replied, his voice distant. "She likes carnations. White carnations." Roberto nodded, though sadness flickered across his face. He had asked John once, years ago, who he was waiting for. John had answered simply, "My wife, Eleanor. Her flight is delayed." Roberto had not asked again. The afternoon shift change brought new faces to the terminal, but the veterans all knew John. They had learned not to disturb him, not to ask questions, not to suggest that perhaps he should go home. There was something about his vigil that transcended pity or concern. It had become part of the airport's fabric, as permanent as the departure boards and the smell of overpriced coffee. At 3:15, something unusual happened. A young woman approached John's bench, and unlike the others who had come and gone over the years, she sat down beside him. She was in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes behind black-framed glasses. She wore jeans and a grey blazer over a white T-shirt, and she carried a leather messenger bag that bulged with notebooks and recording equipment. Around her neck hung a press credential from the Dallas Morning Chronicle. Her name was Sara Chen, and she was a journalist who specialized in human interest stories, the kind that made people cry into their morning coffee and share on social media with captions like "Faith in Humanity Restored" or "This Broke My Heart." She had been at the airport to cover a story about increased security measures when she had noticed John, asked about him, and heard the whispers. The crazy old man who waits for nobody, the widower who cannot let go, the ghost hunter, the abandoned husband. Everyone had a theory, but nobody knew the truth. Sara had built her career on finding the truth in the spaces between rumors and reality. She was good at her job, good at getting people to talk, good at uncovering the stories that others missed. Something about John Mercer called to her journalistic instincts, that particular tingle that said there was something deeper here, something worth telling. "Mr. Mercer," she said softly, introducing herself. "My name is Sara Chen. I'm a reporter. I was wondering if I could talk to you about why you come here every day." John did not turn his head. "I'm waiting for my wife." "I understand," Sara said, though she did not yet. "What's her name?" "Eleanor. Eleanor Marie Mercer." Sara pulled a small notebook from her bag, the old-fashioned kind that reporters in movies always carried. She believed in the tactile act of writing, the way a pen on paper created a connection that typing on a phone could never match. "That's a beautiful name," she said. "How long have you been waiting for her?" "Since September 14th, 2014, John replied, his voice carrying the precision of someone who had recited these words many times before, perhaps only to himself. "Flight 307 from Paris. It should have landed at 7:12 in the evening. It was delayed." Sara wrote quickly, her journalist's shorthand capturing every word. 2014, 10 years ago. She did the math in her head. 3,650 days, give or take. "That's a long delay," she said carefully, watching his face for reaction. "Yes," John agreed, "very long, but she'll come. She promised she would come home." Something in his voice made Sara's chest tighten. It was not the voice of a man in denial or delusion. It was the voice of someone holding onto the last thread of something precious, knowing that if he let go, he would fall into an abyss from which there was no return. "Mr. Mercer," Sara said gently, "can you tell me about Eleanor? What was she like?" For the first time since Sara had sat down, John turned to look at her. His eyes, which had seemed vacant and distant, suddenly focused with surprising clarity. They were blue, the kind of blue that oceans are in postcards, and in that moment Sara saw the man he had been before grief had hollowed him out. "She was the most beautiful woman I ever saw," John said, and his voice was suddenly younger, stronger. "I met her at a USO dance in 1965. I was 22 years old, about to ship out to Vietnam. She wore a green dress the color of spring grass, and when she smiled at me I forgot how to breathe. We danced to The Way You Look Tonight, and I knew right then that I would marry her or die trying. Sara wrote frantically, capturing every word. This was it, the story beneath the story, the man beneath the ritual. We got married 3 weeks later, John continued, the memories flowing now like water from a breached dam. Everyone said we were crazy, that we were too young, that I might not come back from the war. But Eleanor, she just laughed and said that was exactly why we had to do it now, because tomorrow was never promised to anyone. She was right about that. Did you come back from Vietnam? Sara asked. I did. Came home in 1968 with a purple heart and nightmares that lasted for years. Eleanor never flinched. She held me through the bad nights, talked me down from the ledges, loved me when I could not love myself. We built a life together, a good life. We had a son, Michael. We had a house in Oak Cliff with a garden that Eleanor tended like it was her cathedral. We had 47 years together. Sara's pen paused. 47 years. She calculated quickly. That would put Eleanor's age at around 70 when she disappeared, when the flight was delayed. Where was she coming from? Sara asked. You said Paris? Our 50th wedding anniversary, John said, and for the first time his voice cracked slightly. We had planned a trip, just the two of us. A month in France. We had always talked about going, but life got in the way, kids, work, money, all the usual excuses. But for our 50th, we decided to finally do it. Eleanor learned basic French from YouTube videos. She was so excited. He fell silent, his gaze returning to gate 23. What happened, Mr. Mercer? Sara asked softly. What happened to Flight 307? John's hands tightened around the stems of the wilted carnations, and Sara saw that his knuckles were white, the bones prominent beneath age-spotted skin. There was a storm, he said, a terrible storm. The plane went down over the Atlantic. All 234 souls aboard were lost, including my Eleanor. Sara's pen stopped moving. She sat very still, letting the weight of those words settle over her like snow. I'm so sorry, she said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. I was supposed to be on that plane with her, John continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. But I had a heart attack 3 days before we were scheduled to leave. A mild one, they said. Just a warning. Eleanor insisted on cancelling the trip, but I made her go. I told her we had paid for it, that she had been so excited that she should go, and I would join her once the doctors cleared me. She did not want to leave me, but I insisted. The last 2 words carried the weight of 10 years of regret. She called me every night from Paris, John said. Told me about the museums, the food, the little cafes. She bought me presents, silly things from street vendors. She was supposed to bring them home with her. She was supposed to come home. But the plane crashed, Sara said gently. The plane crashed, John echoed. And they found wreckage and bodies and luggage scattered across the ocean. They found Eleanor's passport. They found her wedding ring. They gave me a flag and a death certificate and told me I should move on, should grieve and heal and remember her with love. But you come here instead, Sara observed. I come here, John confirmed, because this is where she was supposed to arrive. This is where I was supposed to meet her, to take her home, to hear about her adventures. This is where our life was supposed to continue. So I wait, I bring her flowers, the kind she loved, and I wait. Sara closed her notebook, knowing that some moments were too sacred to record. They sat together in silence for several minutes, watching the endless parade of travelers, all of them going somewhere, all of them eventually arriving. Finally, Sara spoke. Mr. Mercer, would you let me tell your story? Would you let me write about you and Eleanor? John turned to look at her again, and she saw that his eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen. Why? He asked simply. Because love like yours deserves to be remembered, Sara said. Because in a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, your faithfulness is extraordinary. Because maybe, just maybe, telling your story might help someone else who is struggling with loss. John considered this for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. On one condition, he said. You have to tell them about Eleanor, not just about me waiting. Tell them who she was. Tell them she was brilliant and funny and kind. Tell them she made the best peach cobbler in Texas, and that she sang off-key in the shower, and that she cried during every single episode of This Is Us, even the happy one. Tell them she was real. I promise, Sara said, and she meant it. As the sun began to set and the terminal lights flickered on, casting everything in a warm, artificial glow, John Mercer gathered his wilted flowers and stood to leave, just as he did every evening at 6 o'clock. Sara watched him go, this man who had turned grief into ritual, loss into devotion. She knew she had found something important here, something that transcended the usual boundaries of a newspaper story. She had found a window into the human heart, and what she saw there was both beautiful and heartbreaking. She did not know yet that this story would change both their lives. She did not know that the truth was more complicated than even John understood. She did not know that Eleanor Mercer had left behind a secret that would transform John's vigil from tragedy into something approaching grace. But she would learn. They both would. Tomorrow, Sara would return. Tomorrow, the real investigation would begin. Tomorrow, everything would change. Sara Chen did not sleep well that night. She lay in her small apartment in downtown Dallas, staring at the ceiling fan as it made its lazy revolutions, and thought about John Mercer, about Eleanor, about love that survived even death, or perhaps especially death. At 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and opened her laptop. The blue glow illuminated her face as she began to search, typing with the focused intensity of someone chasing a story that mattered. Flight 307 Paris to Dallas, September 2014 crash. She entered into the search bar, and the results flooded her screen like a dam breaking. The headlines were uniformly tragic. Transatlantic flight claims 234 lives. No survivors in ocean crash. Families mourn as recovery efforts continue. The articles were accompanied by photographs of debris floating on dark water, of Coast Guard vessels searching in vain, of memorial services where hundreds gathered to grieve collectively for strangers who had become bound together by catastrophe. Sara read every article she could find, taking notes in her precise handwriting, building a timeline of that terrible day. Flight 307 had departed Charles de Gaulle Airport at 9:15 in the morning Paris time, scheduled to arrive in Dallas at 7:12 in the evening local time. The weather had been clear at departure, but a massive storm system had developed over the Atlantic, one of those rare meteorological events where multiple pressure systems collided to create something monstrous. The plane had maintained contact with air traffic control until approximately 3 hours into the flight. Then somewhere over the vast emptiness of the ocean, the communication had ceased. No mayday call, no distress signal, just silence where there had been voices. Search and rescue operations had begun immediately, but the storm made everything difficult. It took 4 days before they found the first pieces of wreckage, 2 weeks before they recovered the flight data recorder, 3 months before they called off the search for bodies, having recovered only 87 of the 234 souls aboard. Eleanor Marie Mercer had not been among those recovered. Her name appeared on the manifest. Her passport had been found floating in the debris field, but her body remained somewhere in the Atlantic, cradled by the same ocean she had flown over to reach her anniversary adventure. Sara leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. This was the story everyone knew, the official record, but something nagged at her, some journalist's instinct that whispered there was more to discover. She thought about John's face when he spoke about Eleanor, about the precise way he had described that day, that flight number, that gate, Gate 23. Sara sat up suddenly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She pulled up the airport's current terminal map, then searched for archived versions from 2014. It took some digging, but she found what she was looking for in a cached web page from the airport's old site. In September 2014, international arrivals from Paris had not used Terminal C, Gate 23. They had used Terminal D, Gates 30 through 37. John Mercer had been waiting at the wrong gate for 10 years. Sara's heart clenched. Did he not know? Had no one ever told him, or had his mind, damaged by grief and possibly by something more clinical, simply rewritten the details to create a ritual he could sustain? She looked at the clock. 4:30 in the morning. Too early to make phone calls, but not too early to keep researching. Sara pulled up the White Pages database her newspaper subscribed to and searched for John Mercer in the Dallas area. She found him in Oak Cliff, the neighborhood he had mentioned, at an address on Willamette Avenue. Then she searched for family. The obituary for Eleanor Mercer was easy to find, published in the Dallas Morning Chronicle 10 years ago. Eleanor Marie Mercer, 70 years old, beloved wife of John Mercer, loving mother of Michael Mercer, devoted grandmother of Sophie and Lucas Mercer, died tragically in the crash of Flight 307 on September 14, 2014. A memorial service will be held at Laurel Land Memorial Park on September 21st. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the American Heart Association. Michael Mercer. The son John had mentioned. Sara searched for him next and found several possibilities in the Dallas area. She cross-referenced them with the obituary details and found a Michael Mercer, age 52, who worked as an architect at a firm in downtown Dallas. His professional profile included a mention of his wife, Jennifer, and 2 children. Sara saved all the information, creating a file that was beginning to look less like a simple human interest story and more like an investigation. She had questions now, so many questions, and she knew where to start finding answers. At 8 o'clock, after a shower and 3 cups of coffee, Sara called the architectural firm where Michael Mercer worked. The receptionist was pleasant and professional, and told Sara that Mr. Mercer was not in yet, but was expected around 9. Sara left her name and number, and a message that she was calling about a story regarding his father. While she waited for the callback, Sara drove to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The morning traffic was heavy, the kind of slow-moving river of metal and frustration that characterized every major city's rush hour. She used the time to organize her thoughts, to plan her questions, to prepare for what she suspected might be a difficult conversation. She arrived at the airport at 9:15 and made her way to Terminal C. John was already there, sitting on his bench with a fresh bouquet of wilted carnations. Today they were pink, or had been once, now faded to the color of old rose petals pressed between book pages. Sara sat down beside him without speaking. They watched the morning travelers together for several minutes, the comfortable silence of 2 people who had shared something meaningful the day before. "You came back," John said finally. "I told you I would," Sara replied. "I want to tell Eleanor's story. But to do that properly, I need to understand more. Would you be willing to talk with me more? Maybe somewhere quieter than this?" John turned to look at her, his blue eyes clear in the morning light. "What else do you need to know?" "Everything," Sara said honestly. "I want to know about your life together, about your son, about what happened after the crash. I want to understand how you ended up here doing this every single day for 10 years. Something flickered across John's face, a shadow of emotion, too complex to name. "My son does not like me coming here." "Why not?" Sara asked gently. "He thinks I am losing my mind," John said simply. "He thinks I cannot accept that Eleanor is gone. He wants me to move into one of those places, those senior living communities where they have activities and meal times and people to watch you to make sure you do not wander off." "Is that what this is?" Sara asked. "Wandering?" "No," John said firmly. "This is waiting. There is a difference." Before Sara could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar Dallas number. "Excuse me," she said to John, then answered. "Sara Chen." "Miss Chen, this is Michael Mercer. You left a message about my father." The voice was male, professional, with an undercurrent of tension that Sara recognized from years of interviewing people about difficult subjects. "Yes, Mr. Mercer. Thank you for calling back. I'm a journalist with the Dallas Morning Chronicle, and I've been talking with your father about his daily visits to the airport. I'd like to write a story about him and your mother, if you'd be willing to speak with me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sara waited, letting the silence do its work. "Where are you right now?" Michael asked finally. "At the airport, Terminal C. With my father?" Yes, another pause, longer this time. Then, I'll be there in 30 minutes. Please do not leave and please do not publish anything about my father without talking to me first. The line went dead. Sara lowered her phone slowly, processing the tone of that conversation. There was something there, some urgency or concern or perhaps fear that went beyond a son worried about his elderly father's eccentricities. "That was your son," Sara told John. "I know," John said. "He has my face. I could hear him even from here." He did not sound surprised or concerned, merely resigned. "He's coming to meet us," Sara continued. "Of course he is. He always does when someone takes an interest in my story. He wants to explain me away, to tell you about the dementia, about the grief, about how I am not a story, but a symptom." "Do you have dementia, Mr. Mercer?" Sara asked directly. She had learned long ago that sometimes the kindest thing was to be blunt. John looked at her with those clear blue eyes, and Sara saw something in them that looked very much like lucidity. "The doctors say I do. Early stages, they call it. Mild cognitive impairment progressing to probable Alzheimer's disease. They give me pills that are supposed to slow it down, but I can feel it happening anyway. Little things at first, forgetting where I put my keys, losing track of conversations. But some things, Miss Chen, some things I remember with perfect clarity. I remember Eleanor. I remember every detail of her face, her voice, her laugh. I remember the last thing she said to me before she boarded that plane. 'I love you more than all the stars, John Mercer, and I will see you soon.' Those words are carved into my soul deeper than any disease could ever reach." Sara felt tears prick at her eyes but blinked them back. This was not about her emotions. This was about bearing witness. "What do you want people to know?" she asked. "When they read about you, what do you want them to understand?" John was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on gate 23. "I want them to know that love does not end just because life does. I want them to know that faithfulness is not foolishness. I want them to know that Eleanor Mercer lived and loved and mattered, and that she deserves to be remembered as more than just a name on a passenger manifest, a statistic in a tragedy." "I can do that," Sara promised. "I will do that." They sat together in silence until Michael Mercer arrived exactly 28 minutes later. Sara recognized him immediately, not because she had seen his photograph, but because he was his father's son in every visible way. He had John's height, John's build, John's blue eyes. But where John's face had been carved by grief into something almost peaceful in its resignation, Michael's face showed the active tension of someone fighting a battle he knew he could not win. He was dressed in a sharp suit, the uniform of successful professionals everywhere, and he carried himself with the controlled energy of someone who had left an important meeting to deal with an emergency. His eyes found his father immediately, and Sara saw love there, and exasperation and bone-deep weariness. "Dad," Michael said, his voice gentler than it had been on the phone, "I see you found a new friend. Michael, this is Sara Chen. She is a journalist. She wants to tell your mother's story." Michael turned to Sara, and his expression hardened. "Miss Chen, I appreciate your interest, but I need to speak with you privately. Dad, why don't you stay here, and Miss Chen and I will get some coffee." It was not really a question. Sara glanced at John, who nodded slightly, and then she followed Michael Mercer toward a nearby Starbucks, feeling like a student being summoned to the principal's office. They ordered coffee neither of them wanted, and sat at a small table away from the main traffic flow. Michael did not waste time with pleasantries. "You cannot write this story," he said flatly. "With respect, Mr. Mercer, that is not your decision to make. Your father is a competent adult who agreed to speak with me." "My father has dementia," Michael said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "He is not competent to make decisions about his own exploitation. I'm not exploiting him. I'm listening to him. It's the same thing you want to write some tearjerker about the devoted husband who cannot let go, get it shared on social media, maybe win some award for human interest journalism. Meanwhile, you will make my father into a spectacle, and I will be left to deal with the consequences." Sara leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. "Mr. Mercer, I understand your concern. I do. But your father's story is remarkable, not because he is sick or sad, but because he exemplifies something rare and beautiful. He loved your mother with his whole heart, and even though she is gone, even though his mind is failing him, that love remains constant. That is not exploitation, that is testimony. Michael's jaw clenched. He looked away, staring at nothing, and Sara saw him fighting for control. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Do you know what it is like to watch your father disappear piece by piece? To see the man who taught you to ride a bike and helped you with your homework and walked you down the aisle at your wedding slowly vanish into someone you do not recognize? Do you know what it is like to have the same conversation 6 times in one day because he cannot remember having it the first 5 times? To watch him put his shoes in the refrigerator and his milk in the closet and not understand why that is? Wrong? No, Sara admitted. I do not. Then you cannot understand why I'm so tired of this airport ritual, this waiting for someone who will never come. It is not beautiful. It is breaking my heart every single day. I want my father to spend his remaining good years actually living, not sitting on a bench, holding dead flowers and staring at a gate. Have you told him that? Sara asked gently. Of course I have. We have had the conversation 100 times. He nods and agrees and promises to stop, and then the next morning he's back here again. It is compulsive. It is obsessive. It is the disease eating away at his ability to reason. Sara took a sip of her coffee, buying time to think. She understood Michael's position, truly she did, but something about his explanation did not quite fit with what she had observed in John. Yes, there was repetition. Yes, there was ritual, but there was also intention, purpose, choice. Mr. Mercer, she said carefully, I think your father knows exactly what he is doing. I think he has made a conscious choice to spend his time this way, and while you may not agree with that choice, it is still his to make. You have known him for 1 day, Michael said, his voice sharp now. I have known him for 52 years. I think I understand him better than you do. Maybe, Sara conceded, or maybe you are too close to see clearly. Sometimes love makes us blind, makes us want to protect people from themselves, even when they do not need protecting. Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. If you publish this story, Miss Chen, I will sue you and your newspaper for elder exploitation. I will make your life very difficult. Do you understand me? Sara stood as well, gathering her bag. She had been threatened before by people who did not want their stories told, and she had learned not to be intimidated. I understand that you are scared and angry and trying to control a situation that feels out of control. But your father has a right to his own narrative, Mr. Mercer. He has a right to be heard. She walked away before he could respond, making her way back to where John still sat on his bench, still holding his flowers, still watching his gate. That did not go well, I assume, John said as she sat down. Not particularly, Sara admitted. Your son loves you very much, I know. That is why he is trying so hard to save me from myself. But I do not need saving, Ms. Chen. I just need someone to understand. I am trying to, Sara said, but I need more information. I need to know more about what happened after the crash, about how you ended up here, specifically here at this gate. Can you tell me about that? John was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the plastic wrap around the flowers. After they told me Eleanor was gone, after the memorial service, after everyone went home and left me alone in a house that was full of her absence, I did not know what to do with myself. Michael wanted me to move in with him, but I could not. I needed to be in our house, surrounded by her things, her smell, her presence, but it was too quiet. The silence was crushing. He paused, taking a shaky breath. So I started coming here. At first, it was just to feel closer to her, to be in the place where she should have arrived, where I should have held her again. I did not know which gate she would have come through. The airport is so big, so confusing, so I just picked one and started waiting. This one, gate 23, it felt right somehow. Sara's heart ached. He had picked the wrong gate, but how could she tell him that? What purpose would it serve except to shatter whatever fragile structure he had built to contain his grief? And you have been coming ever since, she asked. every day, rain or shine, holidays, birthdays, anniversaries. I bring her flowers because she loved flowers, and I wait because that is what you do when you love someone. You wait for them, you hold space for them, you remember. Sara pulled out her notebook, but her hands were shaking slightly. Mr. Mercer, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you believe Eleanor is actually going to arrive? Do you think she is still alive somewhere? John looked at her with those impossibly clear blue eyes, and what she saw there was not delusion, but something far more complex. No, Miss Chen. I know my wife is dead. I know she died on September 14th, 2014, when her plane fell out of the sky and into the ocean. I know that her body was never recovered, that she is somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic, and that I will never hold her again in this life. I know all of that with perfect clarity. Then why, Sara began. Because knowing and accepting are not the same thing, John interrupted gently. Because my mind is failing, and soon I will not remember her at all, and this waiting is the last way I have to honor her memory. Because when I sit here, I can still feel her presence. I can still hear her voice saying my name. I can still believe, even for just a moment, that love is stronger than death. He stood slowly, gathering his flowers. It is 6 o'clock, Miss Chen. Time for me to go home. Wait, Sara said, standing with him. Please. There is so much more I need to know. Will you let me come visit you? At your home? Let me see where you and Eleanor built your life together. John considered this for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card with his address, written in shaky handwriting. Come tomorrow, 2 o'clock, but Miss Chen, whatever you write, please remember that Eleanor was real. She was not just my grief or my illness or my loss. She was a woman who lived and loved and deserved better than to disappear into the ocean without a trace. I will remember, Sara promised. I will make sure everyone remembers. She watched him walk away, this old man with his wilted flowers and his unshakable devotion, and she knew that this story was going to be more complicated and more important than she had initially realized. That night, Sara could not stop thinking about the wrong gate. About whether she should tell John or let him continue his vigil in blissful ignorance, about what it meant that his son wanted to silence this story, to keep it hidden away like a shameful secret. She sat at her laptop and began to write, not the article, but notes, observations, questions, and as she wrote, a plan began to form. She would visit John's home tomorrow. She would see where he and Eleanor had lived. She would search for more pieces of this puzzle. And maybe, just maybe, she would find something that would transform this story from tragedy into something approaching grace. She did not know yet about the letters. She did not know about Eleanor's final gift to her husband. She did not know that tomorrow would change everything, but she would learn. They both would. The house on Willamette Avenue sat quiet in the afternoon sun, a modest ranch-style home with faded blue siding and a garden that had once been someone's pride, but now showed signs of gentle neglect. The grass needed cutting, though it was not wildly overgrown, just shaggy enough to suggest that the person responsible for its care had other priorities. The flower beds that lined the front walk still held plants, but they were tangled together in a way that spoke of benign abandonment rather than intentional design. Sara Chen pulled her Honda Civic into the driveway at exactly 2 o'clock, as arranged. She sat for a moment before getting out, studying the house and trying to imagine the lives that had unfolded within its walls. 47 years, John had said. 47 years of marriage, of daily routines, of small joys and quiet sorrows, all contained within this structure of wood and brick and memory. She gathered her bag, checked that her voice recorder had fresh batteries, and walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. Before she could knock, the door opened, and John Mercer stood there in the same clothes he had worn yesterday and the day before, as if he owned only one outfit, or could not remember that he had other options. Ms. Chen, he said, and his voice carried that careful formality of someone who had been raised in a different era, when manners mattered and first names were earned rather than assumed. Please, come in. The interior of the house was exactly what Sara had expected, and nothing like what she had imagined, both at once. It was clean but cluttered, organized but overfull, the kind of space that accumulates layers of life like sediment in a riverbed. The living room to her right held a floral-patterned sofa that had seen better decades, a recliner with a depression worn into its cushion, and walls covered with photographs in mismatched frames. "Would you like some tea?" John asked, already moving toward what Sara assumed was the kitchen. Eleanor always made tea for guests. It seemed rude not to offer. "Tea would be lovely, thank you," Sara said, following him through the living room and into a kitchen that was stuck somewhere in the 1980s, with yellow Formica countertops and appliances in harvest gold. A calendar hung on the wall, and Sara noticed with a pang that it was from 2014, still turned to September, with a red X marked through the 14th day. John filled a kettle with water and set it on the stove, his movements slow but practiced. While he prepared the tea, Sara took in the details of the room. A cookie jar, shaped like a rooster, sat on the counter. Magnets covered the refrigerator, holding up children's drawings that were yellowed with age, report cards from decades past, and a single photograph of a young couple on their wedding day. Sara moved closer to the photograph. The man was clearly John, though young and strong and full of a vitality that his current self had long since lost. He wore a military uniform, crisp and formal, and his smile was wide and genuine. The woman beside him, Eleanor, was breathtaking. She wore a simple white dress and held a bouquet of white carnations, and her face radiated a joy so pure that it seemed to transcend the limitations of the photograph itself. "That was taken on October 9th, 1965, John said from behind her, making her jump slightly. She had not heard him approach. "3 weeks after we met. We got married at the courthouse because I was shipping out in 4 days, and Eleanor said she did not care about a big wedding. She just wanted to be my wife before I left." "She was beautiful," Sara said softly. "She was," John agreed, and there was no past tense in his voice, no acknowledgement of loss. "She is." The kettle began to whistle, and John turned to attend to it, pouring water into 2 mismatched mugs, with tea bags already waiting inside. He handed one to Sara, and she noticed that his hands shook slightly, a tremor that could have been age or illness, or simply the weight of grief made physical. They moved back to the living room, where John settled into his recliner and Sara took the sofa. Between them sat a coffee table covered with more photographs, coasters, and a stack of crossword puzzle books that looked well used. "Thank you for inviting me into your home," Sara began, pulling out her notebook. "I know this is not easy. Nothing is easy anymore," John replied, but there was no self-pity in his voice, just a statement of fact. But Eleanor would have wanted her story told. She always said that people's lives should matter, that we should leave marks on the world that outlast our time in it. Sara turned on her voice recorder, setting it on the coffee table between them. "Tell me about your life together. After you came back from Vietnam, how did you build this life?" John took a sip of his tea, and his eyes grew distant as he traveled back through the years. "I came home in 1968. Eleanor had waited for me, had written me letters every single day I was gone. Some men came home to find their wives had moved on, could not handle the waiting or the fear, but not my Eleanor. She was at the airport when I landed, wearing that same green dress from the USO dance, and when I saw her, I knew I was finally home. What did you do? For work, I mean." "I was a machinist, worked at a factory that made airplane parts, which is funny when you think about it. Spent 35 years helping to build the things that keep planes in the sky, and then a plane took Eleanor away from me. But I was good at my work, provided for my family. We bought this house in 1972. It cost $32,000, which seemed like all the money in the world at the time." Sara wrote quickly, capturing his words. "And your son, Michael? He was born in 1973. Eleanor had a difficult pregnancy, was on bed rest for the last 3 months. But when they put that baby in my arms, when I looked at his face and saw that he had Eleanor's eyes, I understood what people meant when they talked about the meaning of life. He was perfect. We named him Michael after my father, who died in Korea, and never got to meet his grandson. You mentioned Michael has children of his own. Sophie and Lucas, 12 and 9 years old now, I think, or maybe 13 and 10. Time moves strangely these days. John's voice faltered slightly, and Sara saw a flicker of confusion cross his face before he steadied himself. They are good kids, smart. Michael did better than I did, became an architect, designed buildings instead of airplane parts. He has a beautiful home in Plano. Eleanor was so proud of him. Does Michael bring the children to visit you? Sara asked gently. John's expression clouded. Not as much anymore. He worries that I will upset them, that they will remember me as the confused grandfather instead of the man I used to be. He is probably right. I forget their names sometimes. Last month I called Sophie by Eleanor's name, and she started crying. Michael was very angry with me, though he tried to hide it. Sara felt a tightness in her chest. This was the reality of cognitive decline, the way it stole not just memories but relationships, connections, the very fabric of family. Can you tell me about Eleanor? She asked, shifting the focus. What was she like? What did she do? John's face brightened immediately, the clouds parting to reveal sun. Eleanor was a teacher, 3rd grade. She taught for 38 years at the same elementary school in Oak Cliff. She loved those children like they were her own. Every year, she would come home with stories about her students, about the ones who struggled, and the ones who excelled, and the ones who just needed someone to believe in them. She kept in touch with many of them over the years. They would come back as adults and tell her how much she had meant to them, how she had changed their lives. He stood suddenly, moving to a bookshelf that lined one wall. His fingers traced across the spines of books until he found what he was looking for, a photo album bound in blue leather. He brought it back to the sofa and sat beside Sara, opening it with careful hands. The pages were filled with photographs that chronicled a life. Sara saw John and Eleanor young and laughing, holding their infant son. She saw birthday parties and Christmases and ordinary moments elevated to importance by their preservation. She saw them age gradually through the pages, their faces changing, but their eyes remaining constant in the way they looked at each other. "This was our 30th anniversary," John said, pointing to a photograph of them standing in front of a restaurant, dressed up and smiling. "Eleanor wanted to go to this fancy steakhouse downtown. We saved up for months. She wore a blue dress that made her eyes look like the ocean. I told her she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and she laughed and said I had to say that because I was her husband. But I meant it. I always meant it." He turned more pages, and Sara watched decades unfold. There was Michael's high school graduation, his wedding to a pretty blonde woman who must have been Jennifer. There were the grandchildren as babies, as toddlers, as young children blowing out birthday candles. And then, near the end of the album, there was a photograph that made Sara's breath catch. John and Eleanor stood in front of the Eiffel Tower, the Paris sky blue and perfect behind them. Eleanor wore a white shirt and khaki pants, a camera around her neck, and her smile was radiant. John stood beside her with his arm around her waist, and he looked younger in this photograph than he had in some of the earlier ones, as if the joy of the moment had reversed time itself. "France," Sara said softly, "your anniversary trip." "The week before she came home," John said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "A stranger took this photograph for us. Eleanor was so happy that day. We had climbed to the top of the tower, even though my knees hurt and I had to stop several times to catch my breath. But when we got to the top and she saw the view, she started crying. She said it was more beautiful than she had ever imagined, and that she was grateful we had waited so long to come, because now we could truly appreciate it." He closed the album gently, as if it were a sacred text. She took hundreds of photographs on that trip. They should have been on her phone, but the phone was lost in the crash, in the ocean. All those memories, all those moments, gone. Sara reached out and placed her hand over John's, a gesture of comfort that transcended professional boundaries. "Mr. Mercer, I need to ask you something, and I hope you will not take it the wrong way. Have you ever considered that maybe it is time to stop going to the airport? That maybe Eleanor would want you to live your life instead of spending it waiting?" John looked at her with those clear blue eyes, and Sara saw wisdom there that dementia had not yet stolen. Ms. Chen, I am 78 years old. My mind is failing. My body aches in places I did not know I had. My son wants to put me in a home where I will sit in a common room with other broken people and play bingo until I forget my own name. But when I go to the airport, when I sit on that bench and hold those flowers and wait, I am still myself. I am still John Mercer, husband of Eleanor, and that identity is the last thing I have that the disease cannot touch. Not yet. So you ask me if it is time to stop, and I tell you that I will stop when I cannot remember why I started. Sara blinked back tears, struggling to maintain professional composure. Your son is worried about you. He thinks the airport visits are making things worse. My son is a good man, John said, but he does not understand that grief is not an illness to be cured. It is a testament to love. It is the price we pay for having cared about someone deeply enough that their absence leaves a hole in the world. Eleanor and I had 47 years together. Should I pretend that meant nothing? Should I simply move on as if she were replaceable? No, Sara said quietly. No, you should not. John stood and moved to a desk in the corner of the room, pulling open a drawer. He removed a wooden box, old and worn, with intricate carvings on its lid. He brought it back to Sara and placed it in her lap. Eleanor made me promise something before she left for France, he said. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, if she did not come home, that I would open this box 1 year after her death. But I could not. Every time I tried, my hands would shake and I would close the drawer and walk away. It has been 10 years, Ms. Chen, and I still have not opened it. Sara looked down at the box, feeling the weight of it, both physical and metaphorical. What do you think is inside? Letters, John said. Eleanor used to write letters. When we were young and I was overseas, she wrote to me every day. Even after I came home, even after we had been married for decades, she would sometimes leave me little notes. On the bathroom mirror, in my lunchbox, tucked into the book I was reading. They were always simple things. I love you. Thank you for taking out the trash. You are my favorite person, but they meant everything to me. And you think she left you letters in this box? Sara asked. I know she did. She told me she had. She said she had been writing them for years whenever she thought of something she wanted me to know. She said that if the worst happened, if she did not come home, these letters would help me remember her, help me move forward. But I could not face them. Could not face her words, knowing I would never hear her voice again. Sara held the box carefully, understanding that she was holding something precious, something sacred. Mr. Mercer, I think you should open it. I cannot, John said, and for the first time since Sara had met him, she heard real fear in his voice. Not yet. Not while I still remember her so clearly. Once I open that box, once I read those letters, it will be real. She will really be gone. Right now, I can still pretend. Sara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that reality did not wait for permission, that Eleanor was already gone, whether he opened the box or not. But she understood that some truths had to be approached slowly, carefully, in their own time. Will you let me write about this, she asked instead. About you and Eleanor, about the airport, about this box of letters you cannot bring yourself to open. John looked at her for a long moment, and Sara saw him weighing something, making a decision that felt monumental. Yes, he said finally, but on one condition. When you write about me, write about us. Do not make me into a tragedy or a curiosity. Make people understand that what I am doing is an act of love, not an act of madness. I promise, Sara said, and she meant it with everything she had. They talked for another 2 hours, Sara asking questions and John answering as best he could, sometimes with perfect clarity and sometimes with confusion that made him stop mid-sentence and look lost until Sara gently guided him back. She learned about Sunday dinners that Eleanor cooked, about the garden she had tended with such care, about the way she hummed while she did dishes, and how she always fell asleep during movies, but denied it when John woke her up. She learned about their struggles too, the lean years when money was tight, the miscarriages before Michael was born, the fights they had, and the ways they learned to forgive each other. John did not paint Eleanor as perfect or their marriage as a fairy tale. He painted her as human, as real, as flawed and beautiful and complicated and simple all at once. As the afternoon light began to fade, Sara prepared to leave. She stood at the door, her bag full of notes and her recorder full of John's voice, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This story mattered. This man mattered. Eleanor mattered. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said. "Thank you for listening," John replied. "Most people do not anymore. They look at me and see an old man whose mind is going. They do not see John Mercer, husband of Eleanor. You saw him. That means something." Sara drove home slowly, her mind full of images and words and emotions too complex to name. When she reached her apartment, she did not turn on the lights. She sat in the darkness and thought about love that survived death, about grief that became devotion, about a box of letters that held 10 years of accumulated courage. And she began to write. Not the article, not yet. First, she needed to understand more. She needed to find out about the letters, about what Eleanor had wanted to say to her husband from beyond the grave. She needed to talk to Michael again, to understand his perspective, to see if there was a way to bridge the gap between father and son. But most of all, she needed to find a way to convince John Mercer to open that wooden box. Because Sara understood something that John did not yet, something that her journalist's instinct had picked up on during their conversation. Those letters were not just Eleanor's words, they were Eleanor's gift. They were the thing that would transform John's vigil from tragedy into grace, from obsession into completion. The story was there, waiting in that box. Sara just had to help John find the courage to unlock it. Tomorrow, she would return to the airport. She would watch John wait. She would observe this ritual that he had maintained for 3,650 days. And then, somehow, she would convince him that it was time to open the box, time to read the letters, time, finally, to say goodbye. But Sara did not know yet that when John finally opened that box, when he finally read those letters, he would discover something that would change everything. She did not know about Eleanor's secret, about the final letter that explained why John's ritual had been necessary, why his waiting had served a purpose beyond his own grief. She did not know that the end of this story was also a beginning, but she would learn. They both would, soon. Sara Chen spent the next 3 days researching, interviewing and writing. She spoke with airport staff who knew John by name, with the security guards who had watched him for years, with the shop owners whose businesses lined the terminal and who had grown accustomed to seeing the old man with his wilted flowers pass by their windows every single day. Everyone had a theory. Some thought he was senile, trapped in a loop his damaged mind could not escape. Others thought he was simply lonely, using the airport as a social space where he could be around people without the pressure of actual interaction. A few thought he was waiting for something specific, though none could articulate what that might be. But Sara had talked to Eleanor Mercer's former colleagues at the elementary school, where she had taught for 38 years, and they had painted a picture of a woman who was thoughtful, deliberate, and deeply intentional about everything she did. Eleanor did not leave things to chance. She planned, she prepared, she made sure the people she loved were taken care of. "She started talking about her death years before it happened," said Margaret Torres, who had taught 4th grade in the classroom next to Eleanor's for 23 years. They sat in Margaret's living room, surrounded by photographs of students spanning decades. Not in a morbid way, you understand, but she was realistic. She knew John had health problems, knew he had survived a heart attack. She said to me once, "Margaret, I need to make sure that if I go first, John will be okay. He is stronger than he thinks, but he will need help remembering that." Sara leaned forward, her pen moving quickly across her notebook. "Did she say anything about letters, about leaving something for him?" Margaret's eyes widened with recognition. "Oh, yes, she was always writing. She kept a journal, wrote poetry, sent cards to former students for their birthdays. She told me once that she was writing letters to John, to be opened after she was gone. She said it was her way of making sure she could still take care of him, even when she was not there anymore." "Did she say how many letters?" Sara asked. "No, but she had been working on them for years. She said it started after John's heart attack, when she realized that their time together was not infinite. She wanted to leave him a roadmap, she called it, a way to navigate the grief. Sara thanked Margaret and left with more questions than answers. That evening she called Michael Mercer. He answered on the third ring, his voice wary. "Ms. Chen, I thought I made myself clear." "You did, Mr. Mercer, but I need to talk to you about something important. It is about your mother, and some letters she may have left for your father." There was a long pause. "Letters? Your father showed me a wooden box that your mother gave him before she left for France. He said she told him to open it 1 year after her death if anything happened to her, but he never has." "Did you know about this?" Michael's breath came out in a rush, a sound that could have been frustration or relief or both. "I knew she had written something. She told me about it before the trip. She said she wanted to make sure Dad would be okay if anything happened to her, but I did not know he had not opened it. God, that is so like him, unable to face reality even when it is gift-wrapped and waiting for him." "Mr. Mercer, I think those letters might be important. I think they might be what your father needs to finally move forward. Or they might make things worse," Michael countered. "Did you consider that? That reading my mother's final words might push him over an edge he's already teetering on?" "I think not reading them is what has kept him stuck," Sara said firmly. "I think your mother knew your father better than anyone, and I think she left him exactly what he needed. But he is too afraid to open the box. He needs help." What do you want me to do about it?" Michael asked, and Sara heard the exhaustion in his voice, the weariness of a man who had been fighting a losing battle for too long. "Come with me tomorrow, to the airport. Talk to your father. Help him understand that it is okay to let go, that opening the box does not mean forgetting your mother. He will not listen to me. We have had this conversation 100 times. Maybe he will listen to both of us," Sara suggested. "Maybe together we can reach him." Michael was quiet for so long that Sara thought he might have hung up. Then, "What time?" 9 o'clock, Terminal C, the bench near Gate 23. "I will be there," Michael said, and ended the call. The next morning dawned grey and threatening, the kind of Texas weather that could not decide between rain and shine, and so hovered in an uncomfortable middle ground. Sara arrived at the airport early, needing time to prepare herself for what she hoped would happen, but feared might not. John was already there, of course, sitting on his bench with today's bouquet of wilted carnations. These were yellow, or had been once, now faded to the color of old parchment. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile, as if the weight of 10 years of waiting had finally begun to crush him. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," Sara said, sitting beside him. "Is it?" John replied, but there was no hostility in his voice, just a kind of gentle confusion. "I cannot remember if I had breakfast this morning. Did I eat breakfast?" Sara's heart clenched. "I am not sure. Did you?" "I do not know," John admitted, and she saw fear flicker across his face, the terrible awareness of his own declining mind. "I lose track sometimes, of time, of what I have done, and what I only meant to do." "That is okay," Sara said gently. "It happens to everyone sometimes." "Not like this," John said. "Not this often. I can feel it happening, Miss Chen. I can feel myself disappearing piece by piece. Soon there will not be enough of me left to remember why I come here. Soon I will just be an old man sitting on a bench, and I will not even know why." Before Sara could respond, Michael Mercer appeared, walking toward them with his briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other. He looked like a man who had taken time off from something important, which Sara supposed he had. He stopped a few feet away, looking at his father with an expression so complicated that Sara could not begin to pass all the emotions tangled within it. "Hi, Dad," Michael said softly. John looked up, and for a moment Sara saw confusion cross his face, as if he could not quite place this well-dressed stranger. Then recognition dawned, and he smiled. "Michael, what are you doing here? You should be at work." "I wanted to see you," Michael said, moving closer and sitting on John's other side, so that the old man was bracketed between his son and the journalist who had become an unlikely part of this story. "Ms. Chen called me. She said you have been talking to her about Mom." "I have," John confirmed. "She wants to write about Eleanor, about us, about how love does not end just because life does. Michael's jaw clenched, and Sara saw him fighting for control. Dad, Ms. Chen told me about the box, the letters Mom left for you. She said you have not opened it. John's hands tightened around his flowers. I cannot. Why not? Michael asked, and his voice was gentler than Sara had expected, full of a tenderness that spoke to the depth of his love for this difficult, heartbreaking man who was his father. Because once I read them, she will really be gone, John said, and tears began to slide down his weathered cheeks. Right now, I can still hear her voice in my head. I can still remember exactly how she laughed, how she sang in the shower, how she said my name. But if I read those letters, if I see her words on paper instead of hearing them in her voice, it will all become memory instead of presence. And I am not ready for that. I do not know if I will ever be ready for that. Michael reached out and took his father's hand, and Sara saw that his own eyes were wet. Dad, Mom is already gone. She has been gone for 10 years. Reading her letters will not change that, but it might give you some peace. It might help you understand what she wanted for you. She wanted me to be happy, John said. But how can I be happy when she's gone? How can I move forward when every step takes me further away from the life we had together? I do not know, Michael admitted. But I think maybe Mom did. I think that is why she left you those letters. She knew you would struggle. She knew you would need guidance. She loved you too much to leave you lost. Sara watched this moment unfold, this raw and honest exchange between father and son, and she understood that she was witnessing something sacred. This was not a story for her newspaper. This was a private grief made public only because sometimes sharing our pain is the only way to make it bearable. Mr. Mercer, Sara said quietly, drawing both men's attention. What if we went back to your house right now? What if we opened the box together? You would not have to face it alone. John looked at her, then at his son, then down at the flowers in his lap. I am afraid, he said simply. I know, Michael said, but I will be with you. We will do this together. And I will be there too, Sara added, if you want me to be. John sat very still for a long time. So long that Sara wondered if he had forgotten the conversation entirely. But then he stood, slowly and carefully, and placed his flowers on the bench where he had sat for 3,651 days. All right, he said, let us go open the box. They drove to the house in Oak Cliff in Michael's car, a sleek sedan that smelled of leather and success. John sat in the back seat and stared out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by. Sara sat beside him, and she noticed that his hands trembled in his lap. At the house, Michael helped his father out of the car with a gentleness that spoke of practice, of years spent learning how to care for someone whose body and mind were failing. They went inside, and Sara saw Michael look around the living room with an expression that mixed nostalgia and sadness. Nothing has changed, he said softly. Dad, you have not changed anything since Mom died. Why would I? John replied. This is our home. Her things belong here. Michael did not argue. Instead, he went to the kitchen and made tea, using the same yellow kettle his mother had used, finding the mugs without having to search. When he brought the tea to the living room, he handed a mug to his father and one to Sara, and then he sat on the sofa and waited. John went to the desk in the corner with slow, deliberate steps. He opened the drawer and removed the wooden box, holding it as carefully as if it contained something fragile and explosive, which in a way it did. He brought it to the coffee table and set it down, then sat in his recliner and stared at it. I do not know if I can do this, he said. Yes, you can, Michael said firmly. You are the strongest man I know, Dad. You survived a war. You survived a heart attack. You survived losing Mom. You can survive reading her words. John reached out with shaking hands and touched the carved lid of the box. His fingers traced the patterns, the whorls and flowers that some long-ago craftsman had cut into the wood. Then, with a deep breath that seemed to come from the bottom of his soul, he lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, maybe more, each one in a white envelope with John's name written on the front in Eleanor's neat cursive. They were organized somehow, Sara could see, though she could not immediately discern the system. Some envelopes were thicker than others, some had dates written on them, some had numbers. John's hands hovered over the letters, not quite touching them, as if they might burn him. Michael leaned forward, his eyes scanning the contents of the box, and Sara saw understanding dawn on his face. "Dad," Michael said, his voice choked with emotion. "Look, she numbered them. Letter 1, letter 2, letter 3. She wanted you to read them in order." John picked up the first envelope with trembling fingers. On the front, in Eleanor's handwriting, it said, "Letter 1, for the first day without me." He turned it over and carefully broke the seal, pulling out several sheets of paper covered in the same neat cursive. "Would you like me to read it to you?" Michael asked gently. "Or would you like privacy?" John looked at his son, then at Sara, then back at the letter in his hands. "Stay," he said. "Please, I do not want to be alone for this." He unfolded the pages and began to read aloud, his voice shaky but clear. "My dearest John, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am gone. I know you are in pain right now. I know you feel like the world has ended, and you do not know how to keep breathing in a universe that no longer contains me. I know this because that is exactly how I would feel if you were the one who left first. But here is what I need you to understand, my love. You are not alone. You have never been alone. From the moment we met at that USO dance in 1965, from the moment you asked me to dance and I said yes, we have been a part of each other. And death cannot change that. I am not truly gone, John. I am in every room of our house. I am in the garden I planted. I am in Michael's eyes and in our grandchildren's laughter. I am in your memories and in your heart, and I will be there until the day you join me on the other side. I have written you many letters, and I have organized them in a way that I hope will help you through this terrible time. Some are to be opened on specific dates, our anniversary, my birthday, holidays that we always spent together. Some are numbered and should be read in order, one each week, to help you navigate the first year without me. And some are for specific situations, marked on the envelopes, for when you need guidance or comfort or just a reminder that you are loved. This first letter is to tell you something I should have said more often when I was alive. Thank you. Thank you for 47 years of being the best husband a woman could ask for. Thank you for holding me through the bad times and celebrating with me through the good ones. Thank you for being patient with my moods, for laughing at my terrible jokes, for loving me even when I was difficult to love. Thank you for being my partner, my friend, my home. I know you will want to stop living now that I am gone. I know you will feel like your life ended when mine did. But I am asking you, begging you, not to give up. You still have so much to give, John. Michael needs you, your grandchildren need you, the world needs you. So here is your first task, my darling. Today, the first day without me, I want you to do something that brings you joy. It does not have to be big. Make your favorite meal. Watch a movie you love. Call an old friend. Take a walk in our garden. Just do one thing that reminds you that life still has beauty in it, even in the midst of sorrow. And then, 1 week from today, open letter 2. I love you more than all the stars, John Mercer. I always have. I always will. Yours forever, Eleanor. By the time John finished reading, all three of them were crying. Michael had his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sara had tears streaming down her cheeks, her professional detachment completely shattered. And John sat holding the letter, staring at his wife's words as if they were the most precious thing in the world. She knew, John whispered. She knew I would struggle. She knew I would need help. She loved you, Michael said, his voice thick. She wanted to take care of you even after she was gone. John carefully folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope, then looked at the box with wonder. There are so many. How many letters did she write? Michael leaned forward, gently sorting through the envelopes. It looks like there are 52 numbered ones, one for each week of the first year, and then these others, marked for specific dates or situations. Dad, she spent years writing these. She created a whole roadmap for you to follow. John reached out and picked up another envelope. This one was marked, "For your birthday." He held it to his chest, clutching it like a lifeline. "I have been doing this all wrong," he said softly. "I have been waiting for her at the airport for 10 years, and she left me instructions. She told me what she wanted me to do, and I ignored it because I was too afraid to open the box." "You were not ready," Sara said gently. "Sometimes we need time to gather our courage." "But I wasted so much time," John said, anguish in his voice. 10 years, sitting on that bench holding dead flowers, when I could have been reading her words, following her guidance, living the way she wanted me to live. "It is not wasted if it helped you survive," Michael said firmly. "Dad, you did what you needed to do to get through each day. Mom would understand that. She always understood you better than anyone." John looked at his son with such love and grief that Sara had to look away, feeling like she was intruding on something too private for outside eyes. "I'm sorry, Michael," John said. "I'm sorry for making you worry. I'm sorry for being difficult. I'm sorry for not being the father you needed me to be after your mother died." "You have always been exactly the father I needed," Michael said, moving to kneel beside his father's chair, taking the old man's hands in his own. "You taught me what love looks like. You showed me that commitment means showing up every single day, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. You are my hero, Dad." They held each other then, father and son, both of them broken and both of them healing, and Sara understood that she had witnessed something transformative. This story had started as a curiosity, a human interest piece about an old man who could not let go, but it had become something much more profound. It had become a testament to the enduring power of love, to the ways we care for each other beyond the boundaries of life and death. Sara took out her notebook, but she found that she could not write. Some moments were too sacred for documentation. Some stories existed in the spaces between words, in the silences that spoke louder than any article ever could. After a while, John and Michael pulled apart, both of them wiping their eyes and trying to compose themselves. John turned to Sara, and she saw that something had shifted in his face. He looked lighter somehow, as if a burden he had carried for 10 years had finally been set down. "Ms. Chen," he said, "I want you to write this story, all of it, the airport, the letters, everything. But I want you to end it with hope. I want people to know that Eleanor loved me enough to leave me a map through the grief. I want them to know that even in death, love finds a way." "I will," Sara promised. "I will tell Eleanor's story exactly as you want it told." John nodded, then turned back to the box of letters. He ran his fingers over the envelopes, touching each one as if blessing it. "I will read them all," he said. "I will follow her instructions. I will do what she asked me to do." "And the airport?" Michael asked carefully. "Will you stop going?" John was quiet for a moment, considering. "I do not know," he said honestly. "The habit is so deeply ingrained now. But I think maybe I do not need to go every day anymore. Maybe I can go when I miss her, when I need to feel close to her, and the rest of the time I can live. I can follow the roadmap she left me. I can honor her memory by actually living, instead of just waiting." "That sounds like a good plan," Michael said softly. Sara stood, gathering her belongings. She had what she needed now, more than enough for the article, for the story that would make people cry and share and remember. But more importantly, she had been part of something healing. She had helped a man find his way back to hope. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said to both of them. "Thank you for letting me witness your love." "Thank you for seeing us," John replied, "for seeing beyond the old man with the wilted flowers to the story underneath. Eleanor would have liked you, Ms. Chen. She always appreciated people who looked deeper." Sara left them there, father and son, sitting together and beginning to go through the letters that Eleanor Mercer had left as her final gift. As she drove back to her office, the grey morning had given way to sunshine, and Sara thought that was fitting somehow, a metaphor so obvious that she would never use it in her article, but true nonetheless. She spent the next week writing, rewriting, polishing every word until it shone. The article was 7,000 words long, far longer than a typical human interest piece, but her editor agreed to run it as a special feature. Sara included photographs that John had given her, pictures of him and Eleanor throughout their life together, pictures that showed the progression of love across decades. The article ran on a Sunday, taking up most of the features section. The headline read, "He waited for her at the airport every day for 10 years, a love story that transcends death." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The article went viral within hours, shared across social media platforms by millions of people who were moved by John and Eleanor's story. Messages poured in from around the world, from people who had lost their own partners, from people who were inspired by Eleanor's foresight and John's devotion, from people who simply needed to be reminded that love was real and powerful and worth fighting for. Sara's phone rang constantly for days. News programs wanted to interview John. Book publishers wanted to turn the story into a memoir. Movie producers saw cinematic potential. But John declined all of it, saying through Michael that he had told his story once to Sara, and that was enough. What mattered to John was not fame or attention. What mattered were the letters. He read them exactly as Eleanor had instructed, one per week, letting her words guide him through the landscape of grief. He learned that she had left specific instructions for him, places she wanted him to visit, foods she wanted him to try, activities she wanted him to pursue. She had known him so well, had understood that he would need concrete tasks to focus on, goals to achieve, a structure to follow. Letter 15 told him to volunteer at a veterans center. Letter 23 told him to take the grandchildren to the zoo. Letter 35 told him to plant new flowers in her garden. Each letter was a gift, a piece of Eleanor reaching across death to care for the man she loved. And slowly, week by week, letter by letter, John Mercer began to heal. 3 months after opening the box, he stopped going to the airport every day. He went once a week instead on Sundays, and he brought fresh flowers instead of wilted ones. He would sit on his bench for an hour, holding Eleanor's photograph, reading whichever letter was assigned for that week, and then he would go home and follow her instructions. 6 months after opening the box, Michael noticed that his father seemed different, clearer, more present. The dementia had not reversed. That was impossible, but it seemed to have stabilized somehow, as if having purpose and structure had strengthened the parts of John's mind that remained intact. 9 months after opening the box, John Mercer stood in front of Terminal D, gates 30 through 37, where international flights from Paris actually arrived. He held a bouquet of white carnations, fresh and perfect, and he cried as he realized that he had been waiting at the wrong gate for 10 years. But it did not matter. It had never mattered. The gate was just a symbol, a place to focus his grief. Eleanor had been with him all along, in his heart, in his memories, in the letters she had left behind. 1 year after opening the box, John read the final numbered letter, letter 52. It was dated to be opened on the first anniversary of her death, though he was reading it 3 years late. Eleanor had known he might not follow the schedule exactly. She had known that grief operated on its own timeline. The final letter was simple and direct. My dearest John, if you have read all 52 letters, then you have made it through the first year without me. I am so proud of you. I knew you could do it, even when you did not believe it yourself. This is the last of the weekly letters, but there are still others in the box for you to read when you need them. Letters for holidays, for milestones, for moments when you feel lost. But I want you to know that you do not need me anymore, not really. You have learned how to live with the grief instead of being consumed by it. You have learned that moving forward does not mean leaving me behind. So here is my final instruction. My love, live, truly live. Not just exist, not just survive, but actually live. Laugh with our grandchildren. Travel to places we never got to see together. Make new friends. Try new things. And yes, if you meet someone who makes your heart lighter, someone who brings you joy, do not feel guilty. I want you to be happy. I want you to love again if love finds you. Because here is the secret, John. Love is not a finite resource. Loving someone new does not diminish what we had. Our love is secure, locked in the past where no one can touch it. It will always exist, perfect and complete, in the years we shared. And you can honor that love by being open to whatever comes next. I love you more than all the stars, John Mercer. I have loved you for 47 years, and I will love you beyond time and space and death itself. Now go. Live well. Live fully. Live for both of us. Until we meet again, your Eleanor. John sat on his bench at the airport, tears streaming down his face, and he felt something shift inside him. A door opening, a weight lifting, a future becoming possible. He stood up, gathered his flowers, and walked to Terminal D. He left the bouquet at Gate 35, the actual gate where Eleanor should have arrived 10 years ago. He said a prayer, whispered a goodbye, and then he walked away. He did not look back. That evening, Michael came to visit and found his father cooking dinner, something he had not done in years. The house smelled of garlic and tomatoes, and the radio was playing softly in the background. "Dad?" Michael said, surprised. "What are you doing?" "Making spaghetti," John replied, stirring a pot on the stove. "Your mother's recipe. Letter 52 said I should cook her favorite meal and invite you and your family over for dinner. So I am. Can you come? Bring Jennifer and the kids?" Michael felt tears spring to his eyes. "Yes, Dad, we will be here." And they were. The whole family gathered around the table in the house on Willamette Avenue, eating spaghetti and garlic bread and salad, talking and laughing and remembering Eleanor together. John told stories about their mother and grandmother, stories the children had heard before, but that felt new somehow in this context of healing and hope. After dinner, John showed them the box of letters, explained Eleanor's system, read them letter one so they could understand what she had done for him. Sophie and Lucas listened with wide eyes, and Jennifer cried quietly, and Michael held his father's hand and felt grateful for the woman who had loved his father enough to create a roadmap through grief. Time passed, as it does. John continued to decline gradually, the dementia taking more and more of his memories, but he held on to Eleanor longer than the doctors had predicted. He held on to her because she had given him the tools to do so, the letters that reinforced their story every time he read them. 2 years after opening the box, John Mercer died peacefully in his sleep, in the house he had shared with Eleanor, in the bed where they had spent 47 years waking up beside each other. He was 80 years old, and he died with a smile on his face and letter one clutched in his hand. At his funeral, Michael read from several of Eleanor's letters, sharing his mother's wisdom and love with the crowd of people who had come to pay their respects. Sara Chen was there too, sitting in the back and crying silently for the man who had taught her that love could survive anything, even death. After the service, Michael approached Sara and handed her an envelope. "Dad wanted you to have this," he said. "He wrote it 2 weeks before he died, during one of his clear moments. He wanted to thank you." Sara opened the envelope with shaking hands and read, "Dear Ms. Chen, thank you for telling our story. Thank you for seeing the love beneath the loss. Thank you for helping me find the courage to open the box. Because of you, I got 2 more years with Eleanor. 2 years of following her roadmap. 2 years of living instead of just waiting. Because of you, I remembered how to be whole. I am not afraid of dying anymore. I know where I am going. I am going home to the woman who has been waiting for me patiently while I finished the work she gave me to do. I am going to the place where there are no more goodbyes, only reunions. Tell people when you can that love wins, always, even against death, even against time, even against disease and distance and despair. Love wins. Thank you for bearing witness to ours. With gratitude, John Mercer." Sara stood in the cemetery, holding John's final words, and she understood that she had been given a gift. Not just a story, though it had been that, but a lesson, a reminder, a truth that transcended journalism and entered the realm of the sacred. Love endures. Love transforms. Love, in the end, is all that matters. She looked at John's grave, next to the plot where Eleanor's name was already engraved, waiting for him. And she smiled through her tears, knowing that they were together again, finally reunited, their long separation ended at last. The airport continued its daily rhythm, planes arriving and departing, people coming and going, journeys beginning and ending. Gate 23 remained, anonymous and unremarkable, just another gate in a sea of gates. But for 3,651 days it had been holy ground. It had been the place where a man had practiced devotion. It had been the site of a vigil that testified to the enduring power of love. And though John Mercer no longer sat there with his wilted flowers, his story lived on. People read Sarah's article and were moved. They shared it with loved ones. They printed it out and kept it. They remembered it when they faced their own losses, their own grief, their own struggles to keep loving in a world that seemed designed to break hearts. And sometimes, late at night when the terminal was quiet, airport employees would swear they saw an old man sitting on that bench near gate 23, holding flowers and smiling. Just for a moment, just long enough to remind them that some loves are too strong to ever truly end. Some loves wait, some loves endure, some loves transcend even death itself, and some loves leave behind letters, roadmaps, instructions for how to keep living when living seems impossible. Eleanor and John Mercer's love was all of these things, and it would be remembered forever. And so we reach the end of another unforgettable journey. If this story touched your heart, stirred your emotions, or simply made you feel something, you can help me in 3 simple ways. Leave your like. It's quick, free, and shows me I'm on the right path. Subscribe and turn on the bell to never miss our upcoming stories. Comment below what moment struck you the most in this story. Every like, every subscription, every comment motivates me to bring you more engaging, emotional stories full of twists and turns. And if you know someone who would love this story, share it. Sometimes a good narrative is exactly what someone needs for their day. Thank you for being here with me. See you in the next story.